What is the ideal bass guitar setup for worship?
Oh, there's only one?
Well, I don't know. Is there? Is there more than one?
Well, I hope so. Listen, what we're going to talk about for a few minutes here. 4-string bass, 5-string bass, 6-string bass, right? Jazz pickups, precision pickups, humbuckers. Do I compress it? Do I put overdrive on it? All right. Let's start the conversation where we love to start conversations. First of all, let's get a decent bass player holding the instrument. Now, bass is one of the best areas to get people started on your worship team. You take somebody who's never played music in their entire life. Most instruments look really daunting to them. Mm-hmm. A bass guitar is pretty accessible.
Yeah, you got 4 strings.
Yeah, start with a 4-string for sure. And show them where some notes are.
Yeah.
Get them some decent, technique with their plucking fingers. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they have a little bit of musical ability to keep time and all that. But the bass part doesn't need to be super complex. In a lot of cases, it shouldn't be complex.
Yeah.
So I'm all about getting new people started on bass. I think it's the number one place to feed people into your worship team because it's one of the easiest instruments to pick up. It's probably one of the hardest to master overall, but it's easy to pick up.
Yep.
So anyways, what kind of rig should you give them? Well, we've experienced in a lot of churches, less is more, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Good bass guitar, good DI, good cables.
Yeah. What else would you need? Maybe a tuner to keep it in tune.
Yeah.
Or tune it ahead of time. Whatever.
And whether you want to do 4-string or 5-string, a lot of that comes down to how does your bass player feel about that?
Yeah.
So I bought my first 5-string bass when I was in college. I fell in love with it. I actually sold all my 4-string basses, which was a really dumb thing I did. Never sell your basses. Because now in my older age, I miss...
You have more gray than I do.
I do. I miss those basses. I miss those 4-strings. And I read a lot of really good articles by guys who say you choose your bass for the situation. Most bass players agree that you should play a 4-string whenever possible. But it's anecdotal. They don't really give you any good reason except they just feel like that's what you should do. I usually would play 5-string in a setting where those lower notes are going to be needed.
Yeah. I would say in a worship setting, it kind of depends on your worship leader. If your worship leader is consistently singing in E flat.
Yeah. Well, you could always tune your 4-string down.
You could. I mean, if it's that consistent, maybe. But you know what I'm saying? If they're consistently playing in keys, that it would be really nice to be able to go just a kiss lower than E.
Well, or even something as dumb. This is kind of nerdy, gang, but you take a song that's in the key of G, the 4 chord is the C chord. And on the bass, that's one of those notes that's kind of, because of the way the bass is set up, it's not as powerful as maybe I'd like it to be sometimes. Because it's not really a low note, and it's not really high yet. It's C and D are kind of both that way. So don't get me wrong. There's some times where I'm playing a song where the chorus starts on the 4 chord, so it starts on the C chord. And on the last chorus, I've decided I really want to nail that low C because it's going to change the way the band feels.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but do you notice the whole path I took to get there? I made decisions. First of all, I'm a decent musician. I've practiced bass guitar. I'm listening to the band, and I'm thinking critically and going, I know the chorus starts on the C chord, and I know the last chorus, I want to change the dynamic a little bit. Yeah. Those were all conscious choices. If you have a bass player just picking up a 5-string just because they thought it looked cool, we talk about people always shopping with their eyes instead of their ears. But also, if you take a bass player who's practiced a lot on a 5-string and they're good at it, then sure, there's no problem with it. As far as signal chain, one of the most common effects to put on bass is overdrive or fuzz. And it can do a lot. Yeah. It can do a lot. In fact, I know a worship band, I'm not going to say their name, but they're one of the big ones. They make all their bass players play with the exact same rig. That's okay. That's a choice they've made. It's a precision bass, which is going to have a pretty punchy kind of mid-range, and they always run it through overdrive. So even if they're playing a soft, gentle song, there's still a tidge of overdrive. Those are all choices that their sound techs and production guys have made because they're producing an entire sound together, and so it fits their music. It works.
Makes sense.
The problem you run into is when people watch these rig rundown videos.
Yes.
And they go, so-and-so church, who's really big, uses a precision bass through this compressor, through this overdrive, through this DI, and that's how they get their sound. And you go and you don't buy that same bass. You buy a cheap version of it.
Yep.
You buy a cheap compressor. You buy a cheap overdrive, and you've never used them in your entire life.
Yeah. Yep.
You're not going to get the same sound.
Yes, correct.
And unfortunately, you're usually going to make it worse. We were just in a church where they had a whole pedal board set up for their bass. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And Stuart's sitting at front of house, and he's like, man, we're not getting a good bass signal. I said, hold on 1 second. And I went
Unplug the Blue Sky.
And pulled it out. Yeah, Blue Sky on the pedal board. You can get cool sounds. I went and pulled the XLR out of the end of this huge pedal board chain, and I plugged it straight into a DI, and I went and took the instrument cable out of the front of this pedal board chain, and I plugged it into a straight DI. Yeah, so
basically bass, PA system.
Yeah. And I said, play the bass again. Boom. And we're like, oh.
Okay.
So here's where I would leave this discussion. The key to getting a good bass sound is making intentional choices with measurable results. So you make a choice, and then you all listen to it.
That's deep, kind of like bass.
Yeah. Make a choice. You all listen to it, and you all agree that added value. And if you put a pedal in your pedal board chain that is not adding value to your sound, take it out. It's not worth it. Bass is one of those things that we generally want to be as clean and simple as possible.